So the White House has figured out what's behind the soaring inflation in the United States. Jen Psaki and the Biden White House, they have cracked the code. And the reason that prices are going up, the people to blame, the businesses to blame are those meat producers. Those are who we are to blame for the inflation. White House points to, let me get the article here. White House points to culprit behind soaring prices. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki blamed an increase in the cost of groceries, including that of meat, on the greed of big corporations, accusing them of profiteering from the pandemic amid the record-breaking inflation. So Psaki, speaking to the press on Tuesday, she said that high inflation is being fueled by corporate greed. She said that Joe Biden and Secretary of Agriculture Tom Vilsack have both spoken to what we've seen as the greed of meat conglomerates. That is an area, one where people go to the grocery store and they're trying to buy a pound of meat, 2 pounds of meat, 10 pounds of meat, 100 pounds of meat. The prices are higher, she said, claiming that you could call it corporate greed, sure. You could call it jacking up prices during a pandemic. Profiteering from a pandemic. Wow. Who would have thought that companies could profiteer from a pandemic?
Go ahead.
There are several progressive groups and lawmakers who are increasingly vocalizing the idea that high inflation is being driven by corporate greed, including companies with high profits, some of whom have met at the White House with the president in recent months. Does the president endorse that idea? Does he think that corporate greed is the big driver of inflation right now?
Well, I think that the president thinks the way people across the country, American families, digest inflation is by price increases. And if you look at industry to industry, it's a little different. So, for example, the president, the Secretary of Agriculture have both spoken to what we've seen as the greed of meat conglomerates. That is an area where people go to the grocery store and they're trying to buy a pound of meat, 2 pounds of meat, 10 pounds of meat. The prices are higher. That is, in his view, and the view of our Secretary of Agriculture, because of, you could call it corporate greed, sure. You could call it jacking up prices during a pandemic. There are other areas where we've seen increases because of supply chain issues, and we're seeing those increases around the world as it relates to gas prices, oil supply, and things along those lines. So I would say there's some areas where we have seen corporations profit from the pandemic, and certainly the president would agree with that component. I don't know the full context of all of their remarks.
I know some companies that have profited from the pandemic. How about Big Pharma? Boy, have they profited from the pandemic. How about Big Tech? Amazon and Facebook and Twitter. Well, Twitter, not so much. Twitter couldn't profit if you threw them from a boat into a sea of money. But definitely Facebook and Amazon and Apple and Google, Alphabet, they've all profited from the pandemic by keeping people at home, locked away in their house. Amazon for sure. They've profited from the pandemic. Boy, has Big Pharma not profited from the pandemic, Psaki? They've profited big time from the pandemic. Big time. We all know. I don't even need to get into how much they've profited from the pandemic and continue to profit from the pandemic. Have the meat companies, the meat conglomerates, maybe jacked up their prices a little out of corporate greed? Probably. But I would imagine that most of the price increases from the meat companies, from these meat oligarchs, these meat conglomerates, are due to the fact that energy is higher, that oil prices are higher, that gas prices are higher, because at the end of the day, everything is made with energy, with fuel, with oil, with gas. And so if your whole supply chain if all the prices in your supply chain are going up, starting with the most important price, which is fuel, then at the end of the day, that final product that gets delivered to the supermarket, to the grocery store, is going to have a higher price because everything in the supply chain has gone up. Everything to get that meat to the grocery store, to make that meat, to pack that meat, to do everything that you need to do. Everything that's taking place on the farm, all of it needs gas, fuel, oil. It's not going to run on electric batteries. Sorry to break it to all the to the green people, but it's not going to work with electric batteries, everybody. So all of these price increases in the supply chain lead to a higher price of the final product. Let's not even talk about the fact that Biden and the Fed just keep on printing and printing and printing more money. I mean, we're not going to get into that, are we, Jen Psaki? But look, this tweet sums it up. When you don't realize the meat industry is highly dependent on fuel prices, and your policies are causing those prices to skyrocket, making the price of grain, feed, water, and all other necessities for meat production increase. Exactly. Exactly. This tweet right here says, open the strategic meat reserves. Yeah, exactly. What was the first thing that Biden did when he got into office? The first freaking thing is he shut down Keystone Pipeline. The first thing. That's the first thing he did in order to play to the Green New Deal constituency, in order to play to AOC and all of these green freaks. Climate change people, the climate change agenda. That's what the White House is pushing, and they're pushing the climate change agenda hard. And Jen Psaki doesn't want to admit it, that the reason the prices are high is because we're pushing a climate change, Green New Deal agenda. That's what she should say. Yes, prices are high because our goal, this is what she should say, if she was honest, but we know she's not honest. Our goal is to move away from fossil fuels, is to move away from oil and gas. That is our goal. That's what she should say. That's what we want to do. And in order to fulfill that goal, we need to do away with everything that relies on gas and oil and fuel. And Americans are going to suffer. In unimaginable ways, Americans are going to suffer. But that's our goal, because we only have, according to AOC, 10 years to save the planet. That would be an honest response from Jen Psaki. It's delusional and it's crazy. But she's delusional and she's also kind of wacko as well. And they buy into, a lot of people buy into this climate crap. The ultimate goal of the climate agenda, the Green New Deal, of course, is a wealth transfer. Give more money to the oligarchs. And of course, the destruction of the United States. Because the entire Green New Deal is all about destroying the capitalist system of the U.S. and essentially making the U.S. into some socialist green utopia, or at least that's the mind of AOC. That's how AOC is thinking about it, and the people above her. But at the end of the day, make no mistake about it, Bill Gates loves his hamburgers. He's admitted that much. He's going to be eating meat. The rest of the people, well, they're going to be eating bugs. But Jen Psaki is just putting more spin on this entire inflation question. And she's saying that it's the greed of corporations. Why not talk about the greed of big tech? Why not talk about the greed of big pharma? If you want to talk about greed, boy, do you have greed there. Do you have companies profiting off of people's misery? I mean, big pharma, companies profiting off of people's absolute freaking misery. Profiting big, not meat. If Biden wanted to solve well, now he can't. Now it's a runaway train. But if he wanted to solve the issue with higher prices at the grocery stores, then he wouldn't have taken the actions he did against the oil and gas industry. The first thing he did when he got into office, look at his actions. Don't look at his words. Well, many times you can't make out what he's saying anyway. He's a freaking potato head. But his actions speak volumes. And those actions were the first thing he did, shut down the pipelines. Because they know the best way to destroy America, the best way to create this AOC Green New Deal utopia that's in their heads, the best way to do this is to shut down the gas, shut down the oil. And they're working overtime to do that. The rest of what you hear from Psaki is spin. And Americans are going to suffer, and the world is going to suffer. But the oligarchs are fine with that. The elite, they're fine with having everyday people suffer. They don't care. The ends justify the means. As long as they get to their goal of a green utopia, then they're fine with people suffering and people not having meat. Meat being priced so high that it's out of their capabilities to even buy it. Bill Gates will buy it. The Zuckbot will buy it. But everybody else, meat will be such a luxury that it's just going to be, a once in a year thing. And they're going to blame it on the meat conglomerates. That's the video, everybody. theduran.locals.com. And go to the Duran shop. Use the code GOODDAY. Get 10% off when you use that code on all the merchandise in the shop. Take care.